Hi class, welcome back, and if you check out the notes that are up on the board here behind me, they go along with what's in our Google Classroom, what's on the blog site. And again, I'm not just reading from the notes because you've got the notes available to read. Just want to give a little context, a little background on how what we're doing in class relates to the world and the current events and the things out there in the real world that we're learning about here in class. And so it's called Viruses, Mutations, and Jurassic Park. I got to revisit our little talk that we did on Jurassic Park just for a little bit, talk about why, unfortunately, you probably can't have dinosaur zoos anytime soon. But if you check out our genetic code or genome, the amount of genetic material in an organism that makes you, me, the plants outside, if you check out the genetic code, it's just instructions. We've already talked a little bit about the instructions that make, a human, a rabbit, a cat, whatever it happens to be, a plant, and the rungs on the ladder, the rungs being the A, T, C's, and G's that connect to give the code to make the proteins that make us, they hang out in the nucleus of the cell. If you think about the rungs of the ladder as being 4 letters, A, T's, C's, G's, those always go on together on the DNA anyway. Think about the English alphabet. We have 26 letters in our alphabet. With those 26 letters, we make every word, every book you've ever written is with those 26 letters. The DNA has 4 letters with which to work, and those 4 letters reside in the nucleus. Now, if you check out viruses, we've talked about them already. Viruses go in, and if you check out, they've snipped out a little bit of the DNA that was in the nucleus, and they now are taking over, they're hijacking, as is often said, the cell. And the cell is making, instead of some protein for the person, some protein for the organism, instead it's making more viruses now. It's taking that DNA, it's copying it, or RNA usually for a virus, but it's copying it, it's encapsulating it in a little protein coat called a capsid, and then once it's used up the cell, often the cell, not all the time, but often the cell dies and splays out and releases these viruses. Here's the thing, before viruses get the completely bad rap that has certainly deserved the last couple of weeks with COVID-19, if you look at certain diseases that are genetic in nature, in other words, they're diseases like cystic fibrosis. We talked about this one in class. It's a particular disease where a person might produce too much mucus. It's not like something you catch. It's not like somebody comes along and has it and it's a virus that gets coughed out and you can catch it. It's something a person might be born with. And what's going on? Well, a little bit of the DNA in some particular cells is making the cell produce too much mucus. And it's a problem because if you can imagine, we have just the right amount of mucus. We've talked about that in our human body systems unit, which we'll revisit next week. But if you have just the right amount, it protects us from infection. It does a job for us. It helps us. It does a number of things. But if you're making too much, you can be prone to lung infections and things like that. That's why it can be dangerous. But if you want to treat this, well, we need some way to fix the DNA. We need some way to change a person's DNA, the code that they were born with. What better thing than a virus? If you can genetically engineer a virus, if you can change the code, the RNA that's in a virus, to take over some cells that have this code that makes the cells produce too much mucus, you can do what's called gene therapy. It's promising, it has worked in some cases, but it's still in the very, very early stages. But if you look at a virus going into a cell will then have the part of DNA that needs to be changed, snipped out, and replaced. Replaced is a little bit like when I tried to compare it to computer code before, replacing the code that was faulty and trying to put in the code that actually helps the person. DNA is an interesting thing, the way it hangs out here. We talk about the code for life and how it codes for everything about you. I used to have a big set of encyclopedias along here, and DNA is a little bit like that. In and of itself, it's just a book. It's just sitting there, and the information is in the book. RNA, which we'll learn a little bit more about next week, especially when we do our unit on immunity, RNA goes into the nucleus and says, okay, this is what I'm going to go tell the ribosomes to do. It has the information from the DNA. The RNA runs out, well, I don't know if it really runs, but it goes from the nucleus out to the ribosomes, and the ribosomes then make the protein. Remember, there's thousands of proteins. The ribosomes then make the protein that's needed for the person. If you can engineer a virus to fix whatever happens to be wrong in the DNA. In the case of cystic fibrosis, they can engineer, or trying to engineer, a piece of DNA that will go in and fix the DNA that was coding incorrectly, if you will, at the when the person was born. Then you can possibly use a virus to our advantage. Last little thing I want to talk about, just to revisit immunity. Kind of thought this when there's a book here in class. By the way, if this is your book, I was cleaning up the classroom in here. This particular book was found on the shelf in the back. It doesn't happen to be mine. I haven't read this book, but I picked it up and I was going to put it with the Lost and Found. But also, it's an opportunity to talk a little bit about the genetic code. Our genetic code, like it says up here, it's millions of rungs on a genetic ladder, A, T, C, G, connected down and down and down. In Jurassic Park, the Jurassic period, you might remember from our geology lessons, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 million years ago. In the movie, of course, and in the book, they have people take little bits of DNA that were supposedly found in fossils and then recreate an entire species, an entire organism from that. The problem would be a little bit like this. This book that I found here in the classroom, I haven't read it myself, but it's about almost 600 pages long. Let's just say I came into this classroom and this particular book had been damaged. I saw maybe the last couple pages that it was 600 pages long, but all the other pages, maybe it fell in some water, maybe it fell in the garbage, who knows. Maybe most of the other pages got lost. If I were to try and take just a few pages from this book, say I had a dozen out of 600, and recreate what the entire story was about, you probably couldn't do it. A dozen pages out of, say, 600, there's just too much missing information. That's the problem with Jurassic Park. With Jurassic Park, you've got so much missing information, DNA being millions and millions of rungs long, that you couldn't possibly recreate that much missing information. In the movie, they try and make the guess that they could take the DNA from a frog, pop it in to fill in the blanks or the holes. Again, it's a nice little science fiction move, but probably not practical. Just wanted to mention that because we had a little clip from Jurassic Park that we showed in class and a little bit of reading on it as well. So, quick recap, viruses, mutations in Jurassic Park. A mutation is a change in the genetic code. We're going to spend a lot of time next week talking about mutations and immunity and how mutations, changes in genetic code, are not always all bad. Yes, usually they are, but sometimes changes can be good. So that'll be our topics for next week. I received a lot of the tests in already, so thank you very much for getting those 10 questions off the blog and the Google Classroom in. Really appreciate it. I was checking those in this morning, as a matter of fact, still doing it. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.